Before the more famous Iowa class to bear the name, USS New Jersey was one of 5 Virginia-class pre-dreadnought battleships. In the middle of the 1890s, the US Navy had experimented with grafting a fixed 8-inch twin turret on top of the twin 12-inch turrets of the Kearsarge class. Subsequent classes had gone with a more conventional 6-inch secondary battery, but with the Virginia class, somebody thought, but what if we kept most of that 6-inch battery, but also put in an 8-inch battery so we can punch through anything but the central belt armor on other battleships? Since having multiple 8-inch turrets on the wings would take up all the space you needed for the 6-inch guns, they went back to grafting 8-inch turrets onto the 12-inch ones again, keeping just one twin turret on each wing. The Virginias were also somewhat larger than previous ships, as the US Navy had finally managed to convince Congress that it was, in fact, something more than just a heavily armed extension of the Coast Guard. Laid down in April 1902 in Quincy, Massachusetts, the ship was launched about 2.5 years later in November 1904 and took about another year and a half to reach commissioning. She barely had time for a few local operations before she became part of the 2nd Division of the 1st Squadron of the Great White Fleet, along with 3 of her 4 sister ships, the 1st Division being made up of the even newer Connecticut class. Although the fleet was, technically speaking, obsolete before it left, as HMS Dreadnought had commissioned the same year as New Jersey, just a bit later on in that year, the expedition still greatly boosted the USA's place on the international stage, and on a naval basis it brought back a lot of valuable information on ship design, particularly when they were out in the deep seas, especially when it came to seakeeping. These lessons would be incorporated into the next generation of dreadnought battleships to be designed, and that's why the South Carolina, Delaware, and Florida classes all have bows that look almost the same as the pre-dreadnoughts, since these were already under construction by the time the Great White Fleet got back, whereas the Wyomings and onwards have a revised bow shape. As the various dreadnoughts came online, the New Jersey, despite being less than 5 years old, was actually rather quickly relegated to secondary roles, either in the reserves or as a training ship, only really briefly coming back to full active service for a naval review in 1912, and when the US intervened in Mexico in 1914, at which point the US Navy found that their pre-dreadnoughts were a rather useful supplement, as they could be sent to do a lot of the work in that intervention without distracting the small but growing dreadnought force from its primary mission. So fast had time moved on in terms of ship design that even US entry into World War I didn't pull New Jersey from her training role, at least until it was time to get every ship possible steamed up to bring troops back at the end of the war after Germany surrendered. Although it must be said that during the First World War she did briefly sport a rather fetching paint scheme. This was part of an experiment to see if it was possible to mess with the eyes of operators of optical rangefinders. With the ship scheduled to be scrapped in the aftermath of the Washington Naval Treaty, it was instead decided to give her something of a more energetic send-off. In 1921, Billy Mitchell had conducted his either famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, experiments with Ostfriesland. In 1922, he'd attacked and sunk the old pre-dreadnought USS Alabama, and in 1923 it was going to be the turn of the New Jersey and her sister ship Virginia. The plan was to attack the ships with 3 waves of bombers, testing high altitude, at least for the time, saturation bombing using numerous smaller 600-pound bombs, medium altitude attacks using single large 2,000-pound bombs, and lower altitude attacks with 1,100-pound bombs, which could be carried in pairs compared to the single 2,000-pounders. The ship took 3 direct hits from 600-pounders dropped by a formation of bombers, but with little noticeable effect. Then there was a single near-miss to port from a 2,000-pounder, after which she showed a small list. Mitchell mistakenly thought that this meant New Jersey was going to sink, and so he sent the 1,100-pound equipped third wave after Virginia exclusively. Virginia sank after 1 direct hit and a couple of near misses, but New Jersey remained afloat, so a 4th wave of 1,100-pound equipped bombers were called in. They all failed to hit New Jersey, but 1 bomb fell close enough to slightly exacerbate the list, and finally 2 more bombers appeared, and after yet another near miss and a direct hit with an 1100-pounder, the stationary and unmanned ship finally rolled over and sank.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.